Thanks for joining us for another edition of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I am here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Let's discuss the state of the Canadian economy with our monthly panel. We also have the Quebec election and new leadership coming in Alberta to discuss. Here to help us out are Sandra Pupatello. She is a former economic development minister and trade minister in the province of Ontario. We also have the Honourable Gary Marr. He is a former cabinet minister and now head of cabinet minister in Alberta and now head of the Canada West Foundation. And joining us as well, in the absence of Joe Oliver, is the Honourable Christian Paradis. He is a former federal minister of industry. I'd like to start maybe, Sandra, with you and just to tell us your impressions. You're in the business world as well. About the latest assessment of the state of the economy generally. Rates are higher. Inflation has tapered a little bit. Maybe give us your assessment of it so far.
Well, it just seems like the impact of oil and gas on our general economy is so huge, and it's such a big part of what people pay every day that flux in that gas price is making a big difference. I'm not sure you're feeling the difference at the grocery store though, and that inflation is still an issue. It's still what everybody talks about around the table of how much more everything costs. I have to say though that if I see one more bank interest rate, I don't know where that's going to send us, because I feel like our psyche is going to send us into a recession, not anything, else. And if the recent bank experiences that I've had really were not positive. They really put you through the paces. And I thought, my company's 10 years old. It's had great 10 years. If I'm having this kind of trouble, how are young people getting moving here? How are they going to get finance? And one finance deal incurs so much more cost to this. It's fantastic because they spend money, they buy things. So I feel like they're going to send us into a recession that we don't deserve. So I'm worried that they don't raise rates anymore, that we sort of hang on. And inflation's double-sided there. When those rates are up and inflation is up, the government makes more money. When things cost more, they get more tax. So, our debt levels for the government will be better than expected. So I get the other side of it. But for everyday people, I think the inflation and, tough borrowing times, I think it's really hard on people.
Gary, Sandra raises a really good point about the Bank of Canada. A little bit, they have to sort of take the lead from the Federal Reserve in the U.S., which are continuing to jack up rates. What's your sense of things?
Well, I mean, look, the Bank of Canada doesn't have that many tools to deal with the issue of inflation. Interest rates are one of them, maybe their most important tool, as the Bank of Canada is wanting to try and put inflation sort of in the 2% range. I'm not sure how many tools that they have to be able to do that, other than to raise interest rates again. And as Sandra said, it's got a really big impact on consumers, on consumer borrowing, on the cost of goods that are going up, the cost of doing business. How do you start a business in this circumstance? These are all challenges, but if we are going to wrestle inflation down into the range that's been targeted by the Bank of Canada, then I'm not sure what options there are going to be.
Christian Paradis, your assessment. You're in Montreal. What's the talk there?
Yeah, I hear basically the same thing. It looks like now being a technical recession. The tools are limited, as Gary just alluded, and we're going in a recession where, as Sandra said, we don't deserve it. But and that was part of the electoral campaign too. We just had an election, as you know, and the government in place was re-elected stronger, despite he had not a very good campaign. They made some mistakes, but still, they kept focus on the inflation, and this is where they succeeded to wedge against their threats, who was Quebec Solidaire. They were talking about adding extra taxes on VUS and capital and stuff like that. So of course, there was this I would say buzzword that was created, what they called orange tax, and this word will stay for a while. So now you can see that it's still a wedge. You have the Conservative Party, a newcomer that was quite interesting. They had an interesting approach on the economy, and you had the Liberals on the other side. They seem to be lost. So what what the current government succeeded to do, like CAQ, he succeeded to keep all of the nationalist matter under his umbrella, the economy, and then say, let's continue. We are the people in charge, and the other parties were flat.
Before the break, Christian gave us a real good tour d'horizon of the Quebec election. Any comments from our other panelists on what they saw in that very important election? Sandra, we'll start with you.
Well, I was going to say, better the devil you know. Every time there's a real, uncertainty in the economy and people aren't feeling comfortable about where things are going, like the price of bread or cost of gas, people tend to stick with what they know. When we had a pandemic in Ontario, they stuck with Doug Ford, even though he was wildly unpopular early in his term. He ended up with a landslide in the next election. So it's sort of not surprising that this is, we've been in uncertain times these last 3 years at least, and better the devil you know. So they've stuck with the guy. I'm worried a little bit about investment in Quebec the longer they keep talking about these French laws. And it's difficult because we need investment from outside Canada. And when they come to Canada, they're not always coming speaking French. And I fear for investment capability when you're being hampered by having all of these new French laws. And I wish that, Legault seems to be a businessman, and I thought that he would get that. So the answer culturally, I understand why they're doing that. And it's a winning strategy for him. But for investment purposes, Investissement Québec is a very strong organization, and they don't need to be hampered by having to explain why everything needs to be done in business French.
Gary, obviously, I'm going to tie this to Quebec election result and what is happening at the time of our filming with the nearly the end of the Alberta leadership race. And of course, one of the themes in the latter was, more authority and more power away from Ottawa. Legault has talked about that in Quebec. Any thoughts from your point of view, and tie it into the Alberta leadership contest?
Well, let me make this first observation based on what Sandra was talking about, and that's that I've noted that Premier Legault, who of course you and I know, Tony, because of our time together as ministers of health at the same time, he's complained a lot about how it's very difficult to get labor in Quebec. But to Sandra's point, when you're making restrictions on the ability of people to get an education in English, when you're putting restrictions on who can work in public service, and when you have French language laws that are restrictive, perhaps it's not surprising that labor is not finding itself as mobile from other parts of Canada and Quebec because of some of that very legislation. I would say that as it ties in with the Alberta leadership race for the United Conservative Party, the UCP, there is some sentiment, some carryover that among leading leadership candidates for the UCP, which is a result that will be determined tomorrow, that what Quebec has is kind of what Alberta wants. And so there's, the push towards Alberta provincial police force. Campaigns have included a provincial pension plan, separating from the Canada pension plan, like Quebec, having greater control over immigration to Alberta. So there has been some influence of what Quebec has done with what some of the leading candidates have said in the UCP race. Now, I would note that Premier Kenney also campaigned on the idea of his Fair Deal panel, which talked about some of these things, wasn't able to move very far on it. So it makes one wonder whether the UCP would have better tools to negotiate different arrangements vis-a-vis the federal government. Remains to be seen. But I would say that what's happened in Alberta in the last 3 years under the UCP has been tremendous amounts of investment that have been drawn to the province. Most recently, the decision last week that was announced over de Havilland opening up a factory just outside of Calgary to produce 3 lines of airplanes. And so the combination of hydrogen production, of Amazon setting up its data centers here, to quantum computing centers, emphasis, Dow Chemicals, petrochemicals, and it's been tremendous in the last 3 years. It strikes me that government should be focused on ensuring that there continues to be positive economic news and job creation out here.
Thank you for that. We're going to take another brief break. We'll be back after that. Please stay with us. I'm going to give it over to you, Christian. Some commentary from both Gary and Sandra about the Quebec election, moving into the language laws. I'd love to get your sense of the Quebec economy as a place for investment, given these language laws.
Yeah, I would say now we're back in business. Let's put it this way. Of course, the election, there were some high political considerations. If you see the CAQ, they want to take the PQ, they want to eat the PQ's lunch, they want to eat the Parti Libéral lunch. And this is what they succeeded to do, and they wedge against the leftist Solidaire. But now, on a practical basis, let's see the investments. They are higher than ever. Montreal is in very good shape. You can see in the northern Quebec, the investments in mining sector is open for business. And when you deal with the French issues with the labor, there are ways to modulate, and there's a lot of accommodations on this regard. But unfortunately, of course, when you are right in the middle of an electoral campaign and you raise these points as wedge issues, it can send a strong signal on the opposite. But if you look, the reform that was made by the current government to Investissement Québec now is focused on business. It's run by professionals doing very well the economy, being very practical about attracting investors. They behave as a concierge service, and we just have good comments about that. But this is the caveat that I wanted to add on this point. You have the politics on the side, you have the economy on the other side, and now hopefully we're back in business and we're not distracted with some bold stuff that we heard there recently.
I'd like to change the topic. Other news item this week, a big news item was in the United Kingdom, the mini budget of the new Prime Minister Liz Truss and her Chancellor did not excite the markets the way that they had intended. Let's put it that way. And at the party conference this past weekend, they had to walk back their attempts to reduce taxes for the higher income earners. Is there a cautionary tale in there somewhere? Sandra, put it to you first, and I'd love to get your thoughts as well, gentlemen. Sandra?
Yeah, I just have to say, in these days, trust with political figures, I think, is key. And it isn't even about issues anymore. It's, can I trust what they say, that they're going to do what they say, etc. So to have that complete reversal instantly in the first week of her leadership, I think is quite damning in the long term. This will be thrown back at her every day on every issue, that she's reversed herself. So what she says actually isn't what she means. It's just worse in the UK because their political structure is such that their party elects their leader. So if her own caucus gets really, sort of raked over the coals in their constituencies, etc., that's going to come back and potentially could take her down. And the general public will have nothing to say about that, because really the only people who should be really angry are those top earners, which is actually a fraction of the population. The general public could be very happy that she walked this back, but her own party members, the supposed business party, could well be furious, and that could be the death knell for her leadership at a very early stage.
Gary, what were you thinking when you were observing what was going on overseas there?
That I'm glad I'm not a British MP. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to really to disagree with Sandra on any of this. I mean, the system is different than what we have in Canada, but it is a cautionary tale about getting too far ahead of yourself and really being ideologically driven in your public policy, in this case, on their position on taxes. And so I think that Sandra's right. I think that Prime Minister Truss is going to be wearing this for a while. It's not the way that any of us, all of us as former politicians, would ever want to come out of the gate, following a new leadership, race. None of us would want to come out of the gate like this. And I think members of Parliament with the Conservative Party are going to be a little more careful about what they approve of Liz Truss's ideas going forward.
Christian, were you able to observe any of this, or were you all enveloped with the Quebec election?
I was quite enveloped with the Quebec election, but just one point, I'm not as expert as my colleagues here, but going in a way and going backward, it's not good at all. Sometimes you need to just throw some rocks in the water, wait and see, instead of going bold and going back. It's just that will stain her leadership for a while, for sure.
I think all four politicians on this program will agree that was not a good look.
Right.
So
it was almost excusable if she was coming from outside, but she was in the government.
She was in the government. We got to take another break, Sandra. Sorry, we'll be back after these short messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. We've got our monthly panel, the Honourable Gary Marr, Sandra Pupatello, and the Honourable Christian Paradis with us today. Next topic, of course, over the last few days, it's been made clear that OPEC may be in cahoots with Russia, wants to reduce the supply of oil to the world by at least 2 million barrels a day. Obviously, there might be some consequences. Gary, what's your take on this situation?
Well, let me say this. First of all, there's a war going on in Ukraine, and there is a kinetic war. That is a war that involves soldiers and artillery and tanks. But there's also an economic war going on, and Russia has weaponized, and we've seen the impact that it's had on Europe. And so I think it will be important for us to understand the need for energy, including fossil fuels, nuclear, all of the above, hydrogen, that we need to be aware of the importance of energy security in Canada and perhaps more broadly in North America. And the good news is we have lots of resources to be able to do so. The worldwide production of oil is about 100 million barrels of oil a day. And so OPEC's decision to carve back on their production by 2 million barrels a day is not inconsequential, and it will have impact on prices. I think the price of oil today, West Texas Intermediate, was about $86 a barrel. So it's recovered from its sub $80 that it was earlier this month. And that's a direct result of OPEC making this decision. Is it in cahoots with Russia or not? I mean, that's impossible to say, because, of course, it would be in OPEC's own best interest, whether Russia was involved or not, to make this production cut in order to keep prices high. Good news for Canada, we have the fourth largest proven reserves in the world, and we could develop more. And I think the further good news is that Canada, not unlike Norway and its production, is determined to go the way of being very responsible as it relates to ESG and, making commitments like the Pathways program that oil sands producers are trying to drive, their consistently. They've been doing so for the last 20 years. They plan on doing so for decades to come. This is a good news for Canada and its energy security issues.
I'd make the point that Sandra last month was in radical agreement with Joe Oliver on something, which was the need for Canada to increase our at least natural gas supplies, if nothing else. Sandra, any thoughts on what we're talking about today?
Well, I do think that we've all seen this regionalization of thought in business, and that's been going on now since the beginning of the pandemic for some industries, even before that. And if that happens with energy, where we get it and where we use it, if that becomes regional, it will make us, at least on our continent, look to each other to satisfy our needs. And that would bode very, very well for Canada. I get that we have to meet goals regarding the environment. I get that, but I believe we can actually do it. And we've all acknowledged that natural gas is a stepping stone to get a lot of people off worse fuel. So let's keep that in mind, and let's have Canada benefit here. And I only want to say how disturbing and unsettling it is to see the very countries that have the most growth in their future, those BRIC countries, all siding with Russia. And you know it's all because of their ability to get cheap fuel from Russia. Can't we turn that on its head and make that an opportunity for us to reach out to those countries? To watch Prime Minister Modi siding with Russia in any way was very, very disturbing. And I just wish that we could write that and turn that into an opportunity instead, to have them looking towards North America.
Dernier mot for Christian. We've got about 30 seconds. Quebec's point of view?
Yeah, of course, the war in Ukraine, I think it shook up a lot of things, and this topic came in the campaign also about natural gas. There was a project here, GNL, that was turned down, and then it came back very hard in the discussions, and we need to just increase our energy supply here. We have tons of this. We need to be open for investment. It was a discussion back in the days when I was myself natural resources minister. Billions of dollars potential project were stuck due to regulations and stuff. So we need to go down this road and develop a know-how, a clean technology, and export it.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a great panel. I wish you well. We'll see some iteration of the panel next month. As usual, interesting discussion with our panel, very animated, lots of insights. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.